bat nipples. So Batman Forever tells the story of Batman taking in an orphan as a partner while Riddler and Two-Face team up against Gotham City. What is up, everybody? Continuing on this little detour Batman review series, we have talked about the 1989 original just a couple of days ago, and I also have reviewed Batman Returns a few years back on Christmas for Brian Lomax. So if you check my Batman review playlist, it'll have all the reviews that I've already currently done, of which there's like 5 or 6, and now we are at Batman Forever, the beginning of the Joel Schumacher era in the Batman films. Now, this film and Batman and Robin, which we're going to talk about next, these are the films that kind of defined my childhood as Batman, for better or worse. I didn't really grow up loving the Tim Burton movies too much. They came out right before I was born, and then I think 1992 maybe Batman Returns, so I was already a child that was cognizant of Batman, cognizant of the comics and the video games and Batman the animated series and all of that when the Schumacher films came out. I remember seeing both of them in theaters. I remember watching them continuously at home on VHS. I had the action figures. I had the video game, the Sega Genesis video game for Batman Forever. I think I even had an R-Zone, some weird-ass cheap piece of shit that everybody and their mother wanted because the fucking commercial was awesome. 90s commercials for toys and video games for kids. Talk about false advertising.
Step into the R-Zone, a brain-bending dimensional adventure.
They're right in my face!
If you want to survive,
Where's the Batmobile?
you better not blink. Batman Forever lives in the R-Zone.
But I wanted that damn R-Zone for Christmas because there was a Batman Forever game in it, and I think I probably played it twice because it was a piece of shit. Nonetheless, I have a lot of nostalgic memories of this era of Batman. These might be the perfect examples of films that you love as a child, and when you take the nostalgia goggles off, you go, oh my god. So Tim Burton decided he didn't want to do any more Batman films, and I believe Michael Keaton went along with that, and so you had WB that obviously wanted to continue making Batman films. They were huge financial successes for them. That was pretty much like their biggest superhero commodity at the time for sure. And so they went with Joel Schumacher, a director that, despite his career kind of getting defined by his 2 Batman movies and that kind of being a negative stain on his name, he's a damn good director. I mean, he directed what is one of my favorite movies of all time in The Lost Boys. He's got a bunch of other films in his filmography that are awesome, so it's a shame that this is his legacy, because quite honestly, I don't really blame Joel Schumacher so much for these movies. This was clearly a marketing direction that WB wanted to take in the 90s, to where they wanted to take the darker, more mature, and especially with Batman Returns, kind of fucked up direction that they had with the Batman movies, and they wanted to gear it much more towards children. They wanted to gear it towards fans and the viewers of the Batman animated series, people that are going to buy the toys, buy the video games, buy the stupid-ass R-Zone. This movie was made for dumbass kids like me. And so Joel Schumacher quite literally just brought that vision to life. Take the Batman movies, take these characters, take the lore, and make a live-action cartoon to sell toys. Now, while Batman and Robin, we're going to talk about that one certainly gets 99% of the hate as far as this direction. Does Batman Forever really fit in with the level of hate that Batman and Robin got? Is it really the same type of movie, or is there actually a lot of things to like here? Let's talk about it. Starting off with the positives for Batman Forever, I think that both in the 90s as well as watching it today, it's still kind of a fun movie to watch. You know, whether or not you love that direction, certainly we've been geared more now to look for the darker, a little bit more introspective and thematically rich versions of Batman stories, but when you're looking back at these old fossils of the 80s and the 90s, I think that the direction that this movie took, this fun, neon, fluorescent, flamboyant as hell version of Batman, I think that it is entertaining on its own merit. It's not the type of Batman movie that I want. It's certainly not the type of Batman movie I want to see made ever again, but for what it was, for that little snapshot in time in the 90s, I think that this movie is still pretty entertaining. There's a lot of action sequences in this movie. I think that the action easily is a lot more entertaining, a lot more fun, and keeps up the pace of the movie than the two Burton films. Not to say that they're better than those films, because I'm certainly not going to say that, but the darker, a little bit more moody atmosphere you got in those first two films was kind of given away here for a little bit more of a movie magic spectacle. And especially as a kid, I gravitated more towards these because there was more shit blowing up. Now, while it's nowhere near as iconic or generation-defining as the score in the Tim Burton films, as the Danny Elfman score, I do like the score that we get in the Schumacher films. It's a different flavor. It's slightly similar, but very different. But hearing it, this very much also gives me a lot of nostalgia. You know, there was this kind of 90s vibe to the Batman scores that we got from the Tim Burton movies to the animated series to these films that all kind of encompass the character for me. They're not as great as the Danny Elfman one. They're not ones that are necessarily going to be as iconic as those, but when I hear just a few notes of this score in this film and in Batman and Robin, I still immediately think Batman. I also like the new direction that they take with the Robin character and with that relationship and that whole dynamic between him and Batman. They essentially keep the core of the character. He's a flying Grayson, his whole family dies, he's taken in by Bruce Wayne, finds out that he's Batman, becomes his sidekick Robin. But he's not a teenager. He's not a child going out and trying to fight Two-Face and Riddler. He's like in his 20s or something like that. So I think that makes more sense. I think that just even in the goofy-ass era of these Schumacher Batman films, that would have been way too far. So I like Chris O'Donnell in the role. Again, somebody who it certainly feels like his career was drastically affected by these two movies because you really didn't see him do much after that aside from Vertical Limit. But even before this, movies like School Ties, movies like Scent of a Woman, he's a great actor. He had a really good career, a lot of potential, and then he decided to be Robin. Think he did a pretty damn good job for what the movie asked him to do, but like Schumacher, he just unfortunately kind of stepped in shit with Batman and Robin. Now moving on to the mixed, and I had a lot more aspects of the movie fall into this category than I would have assumed. I thought I was going to walk into this and have a lot more negatives than I had positives, but there's actually quite a bit of this movie that I like parts of, but don't like parts of, or I see what they were going for and I admire the ambition, but just didn't quite come together. There's a lot about this movie that I'm a little on the fence about. Namely the villains. I think you have Tommy Lee Jones and you have Jim Carrey, of course, as the Riddler here. And I think for a movie that's trying to balance so many characters, Batman, Robin, Chase Meridian, to a much smaller degree, the two villains here, I think that the movie actually balances all of those storylines and the screen time pretty well. A lot of times when you're starting to talk about those characters, the post-Spider-Man 3 world would call it overstuffed, but I think that it works pretty well. And I like, of course, Tommy Lee Jones. I love Tommy Lee Jones, actually, and I love Jim Carrey as actors. And I think that there's something about their versions of these characters that are somewhat nostalgic for me. That was kind of my introduction to the Riddler and my introduction to Two-Face. I was a little late to the party on Batman animated series, so there's part of my brain that always associates those names with those characters to some degree, and so I like it for that. And of course, Jim Carrey here in the mid-90s, Jim Carrey kind of defined 90s comedy. Him alongside Adam Sandler, but probably even more so Jim Carrey. And him bringing that energy, that dynamic to this movie, it dates it, but it also kind of makes it this cool little time capsule where you see, like, this is when this guy was on top of the world as far as movies. And so all of that is great. The negative with it is that it really feels like both Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey are just giving different versions of the Joker, which we already got with Jack Nicholson. I mean, you have Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face. Two-Face has nothing in common with the Riddler, or excuse me, with the Joker, and he's just acting nuts. You know, you're supposed to have two sides to him. You're supposed to have the serious lawyer side and then the fucked up side, the Dr. Jekyll, the Mr. Hyde, and he's just Mr. Hyde the whole fucking movie. There's no Harvey to this Two-Face. And so that's problem number one, but he's just, yeah, and he's flipping the coin, and like the whole rule about flipping the coin, and if it lands on heads, you live, it lands on tails, you die. Like, he just sits there and keeps flipping it until he gets tails. It's like, you cheating motherfucker, that's not how the rules work. So something about him, he just feels like he walked on a set and they were like, okay, Tommy, just act fucking weird. Just act fucking crazy. Did you see what Jack did? Yeah, just do something like that, but a little different. And then you have Jim Carrey, and now Jim Carrey's personality just kind of inherently adds to that side of the character. There has been kind of goofy, maniacal sides of Riddler that we have gotten before. There's also been very serious and intellectual sides of Riddler, and thank God here in a couple of days I'm going to actually see the version of the Riddler that I've been wanting to see on the big screen with Paul Dano. But his version of the Riddler is just Jim Carrey turned up to like 25, which is just goofy, crazy, animated, one-liners, cackling, making all these little goofy little faces. And that's Jim Carrey. That's what you hire him for, so that's obviously what they wanted the character to do. Not the version of Riddler that I necessarily want to see. Then you have Val Kilmer as Bruce Wayne and Batman. Now, I think as Bruce Wayne, he actually does pretty good.
I just saved your life. You owe me.
You are totally out of control. You're gonna get yourself killed.
You're looking at your new partner.
No.
He's very believable in the role. I like his dynamic with Chase Meridian. I like his dynamic with Alfred. I really like his dynamic with Chris O'Donnell's Robin. And so when he's not in the Batsuit, I actually think Val Kilmer does pretty damn good with this role. When he's in the Batsuit, however, which is half his fault, half the writing's fault, there's no intimidation factor to his Batman. There's no attitude. There's no nothing behind his eyes. Like even that quiet calmness that was just so gritty for the Michael Keaton version of Batman, even that's not here because he's having these little quips where he's, yeah, chicks dig the car.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
Or you get the one scene. I'll say this, man. Val Kilmer, his Batman was a sly motherfucker because this dude knew from moment one that Nicole Kidman wanted some bat dick, and she was just, her entire character is just looked like a dog in heat. And so she just wants him so fucking bad. And he just stretches it out and attacks her from both sides as Batman and Bruce Wayne. And the funniest fucking scene in this whole movie is when he finally, she's all hot and bothered. Meet me at my place tonight, midnight. And then it goes to her. She's already butt-ass naked in the bed, just waiting for the Batsuit to come through. The motherfucker shows up, opens the shades all dramatically, and she comes up to him holding the little blankets against her, and she's like, I'm sorry, I can't be with you. I'm in love with someone else. And this motherfucker turns around, and the one time you see Batman smile in the entire history of the character that I'm aware of is because he's like, you gonna get it whether you want it or not. As an adult, I have never watched this movie before, but I laughed my ass off whenever he smiled. I was like, this son of a bitch has got her dead to rights and she doesn't even know it. It was like a reverse of the whole thing in Batman 1989 where he had no interest whatsoever in Vicky Vale. This time he had all the interest in the world and he was like, I ain't even gotta do shit because whether she likes Bruce Wayne or Batman, I'm getting it one way or another, boy. And now getting more into the story of this movie, there's been a campaign going on for a couple of years now saying to release the Schumacher cut because it's become widely known knowledge that the Batman Forever, there was a lot more going on with the character Bruce Wayne in Joel Schumacher's initial cut of this film. It was going to talk a lot more about trauma and about repressed memories, and there was going to be some reveals that he actually was the one that wanted to go to the theater, and so now he's got like this guilt factor that he's the one that led to his parents' death, and all of that character stuff with Val Kilmer's Bruce Wayne was pretty much cut from this movie for time because it's a pretty long movie and they wanted to focus on the action and the spectacle and all the stuff that's going to get people to buy toys. And so retroactively, you got people that have grown up with this film like me that look back and go, wow, there was a more story-based version of this film. I want to see that. I want to see that. So there's one thing. Maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't. We live in an era where hashtag release the blank cut is kind of a fad now with Zack Snyder getting his movie released. And so there's a good argument to say that there was a lot more going on underneath the surface of this movie with its storyline than you would initially think of. When you think back to this movie, you think about all the goofiness, the bat nipples, the very mid-90s performances and characters and everything, but there is still, in the theatrical cut, hints of that storyline with the character of Chase Meridian being this psychologist, and when she's talking to Bruce Wayne, and he keeps having these flashes when she drops the rose, and he keeps getting these flashes to this book, and you get flashback scenes, and even whenever he gets into this little machine that the Riddler has done when it's trying to tap into his brain and see where his trauma comes from, like, there was some interesting stuff still in the theatrical cut. It's buried, it's underneath all the flash, but it's there, and so I appreciate that, but of course, I would rather see the whole thing. I would rather see what was supposed to be with this movie. I can deal with a little bit less of Jim Carrey's Riddler, who kind of takes over the screen time of the movie, and give a little bit more focus to Val Kilmer's Bruce Wayne, because he did really good with that side of the performance. Now moving on to the negatives, I think that the plot of both of the villains is extremely generic. I don't even think they really put a whole lot of time into that. Two-Face just wants to find out who Batman is. Pretty generic motivation for a Batman villain. Then you have Riddler that comes in, and though he was ahead of the pack, retroactively that whole storyline about goofy guy who is wronged by our hero and then suddenly has like this blood feud for him, we've seen that redone like a dozen fucking times since the mid-90s. So Jim Carrey's Riddler was one of the first. It's not his fault, but me, as somebody that has lived with Iron Man 3 and Syndrome, and I'm probably forgetting about 9 others, but a lot, that's just become like a cliched storyline origin for a villain. And so when I go back and revisit this, I'm like, I know where this is going. And so you have that and his whole plot with these little boxes that he's going to put in all the TVs and suck the brainwaves out of all the Gothamites. And I don't know if they were trying to do some kind of like social commentary about TV and how it's like manipulating people or turning them into zombies or whatever, or that was just a line in the movie. I'm not really sure, but it's pretty goofy. And when I think of the Riddler, I don't think of something like that. I think of something maniacal, actually with riddles. The riddles are a total afterthought in this movie, to the point where I probably have not seen this movie since maybe 2000, 1999, 2001. It's been a long fucking time. And so when I watched the film, I had no memory of any of these things, and every single time Batman or Bruce Wayne got a riddle, I solved the riddle within 3 seconds. To the point where my wife like rolled her eyes. She's like, yeah, we know you've seen the movie. And I'm like, I promise, I don't remember this shit. They're just that fucking easy. I don't really like any of the costumes in this movie, pretty much all the way around. Batman, Robin, Two-Face, Riddler. Two-Face is the only one that I can kind of get into a little bit because it's so on the nose. It's literally in half. I mean, he's got half of him that's all champagne and caviar, the other half that's all pig's blood and pierced titties. And so he is kind of interesting to look at. But you've got Batman in a very rubber-looking suit. Of course, you had bat nipples and the ribs and the abs and all of that. It was just very accentuated for no reason whatsoever. It's even worse in the next movie with the intro sequence, but it's not an intimidating Batman suit. It doesn't even really look all that functional. You know, he gets to bend his neck a little bit more, so he's got that on Michael Keaton, but don't really like that one, either of the versions that we get. Robin, his flying Grayson costume is comic book accurate, but it still looks extremely silly. And even his like updated version, it looks a little bit odd because he also has nipples and shit. It's just like, I don't know, something about him, it just looks rubbery. It looks like toys. They don't look like they could actually kick ass in these costumes. And then you have the Riddler, who's got like 9 different outfits in this movie, and I don't like any of them. Like, every single one of them just seems weird. A lot of them just looks like he's in green pajamas with a bunch of question marks around it. And I'm like, dude, that's not intimidating. That just looks fucking weird. Like, you just got that out of your pajama drawer and just drew a bunch of shit on it. Like, later on, he's got like a white suit with red hair, and I don't understand how his hair keeps changing too. He's regular and long hair, all of a sudden it's short and like fluorescent pink red, and then later on he's regular Jim Carrey with brown hair, and just, I don't know, something with his character, like his wardrobe thing was just all over the fucking place in this movie. So, sold a lot of toys, I'm sure, but not iconic. And once again, like I said in Batman 1989, outside of your core characters, there's not really any side characters to talk about here. This version of Alfred is very generic. I mean, there's just no storyline. There's no relationship between Bruce Wayne and Alfred in these 4 movies. You got Commissioner Gordon, who might as well just be regular cop. There's nothing about that guy that stands out. Even Chase Meridian, who gets the most screen time. Her entire storyline is that she wants to fuck Batman, and that's it. That's from the moment she's on screen, she is just so in heat for that bat suit, and that is all the storyline that she gets all the way through to the end, to the point where they try to do this thing where they make you try to believe that Batman's actually in love. He's talking with Alfred. I've never been in love before, Alfred. And Alfred's like, go to her, sir. And it's like, dude, what the fuck? You've been in love twice now by my count, so you're like hit it and quit it to the nth degree. You just fucking delete shit out of your brain once you're done. And my final negative, there's a lot of bad dialogue in this movie. Some of it's just aged poorly because this was dialogue that was snappy in the mid-90s. A lot of Jim Carrey's dialogue would fall into that category, but there's just bad dialogue all around. There was one that literally made my balls hurt because I cringed so hard, to where they try to do this clever little play on the old 1966 version of Robin. When Batman and Robin first arrive at the third act together with their new suits or whatever, they're climbing over this mountaintop and Robin goes, "Holy rusted metal, Batman!" And then he goes, "What?" And he's like, "Oh look, it's rusted metal with a bunch of holes in it." And it's like, what the fuck did you just do? All in all, guys, is this a good movie? No. Has this movie aged well? No. Is this a movie that I'll probably ever rewatch? No. But I will say, I don't think that this movie is as bad as its reputation. It's certainly not as bad as Batman and Robin. It's got a lot more going on, but I think if you approach this movie from the right mindset, that this was a mid-90s blockbuster aimed at young children, the movie makes way more sense. If you watch this immediately after Batman Returns, you're gonna wonder what the fuck just happened. But it's a movie that was trying to go for a very different style of comic book film. It worked for a couple of years, then Batman and Robin pretty much destroyed the subgenre for years to come until the next version of Batman decided to bring it back. So Batman Forever, it was an interesting thing to go and revisit. I think there's a lot of merit to it, but it's certainly a very goofy, weird little time capsule of mid-90s Batman. So if you're a fan of the Batman films from Tim Burton and you want to see where the timeline goes from there, definitely adjust your expectations. Gather some kids around that maybe haven't seen it before, check it out online, and stream it. So what do you guys think of Batman Forever? Are you somebody that grew up, saw this in the theaters, and have loved it ever since? Are you somebody that grew up, saw it in the theaters, fell out of love with it like me? Or are you somebody that has hated this thing ever since it first came onto screen? Let me know your thoughts down below. And do you want to see the Schumacher cut of Batman Forever? Let me know that down below as well. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this review series, as well as my review of the Batman, which will be out Wednesday morning. Unless I come home and I'm just jacked and my mind is blown, I might review it late Tuesday night, but we shall see. It's coming soon though, so please don't miss any of that. Thank you once again for watching, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.